The lunch was still on the tables. That was the part Lieutenant Hana Yoon could not stop looking at. 34 plates. Small plates, the kind made for small hands. Rice half-eaten, soup gone cold. Spoons resting where little fingers had dropped them, mid-bite, as if someone had pressed pause on an ordinary afternoon and never pressed play again. She walked through the colony school on Varath 4 and catalogued everything. That was her job. She was an intelligence officer aboard the UEN Jindo, and intelligence officers did not feel things during a survey. They recorded, they noted, they filed. So she recorded the shoes by the door. 34 pairs, small, some with cartoon patches sewn on by parents who had time for things like that. She noted the crayon drawings pinned to the back wall. A purple spaceship, wobbly stars, a name in a child's handwriting. Sunwoo, age 9. She photographed it. She moved on. The colony itself was intact. That was the strange part. No blast marks, no broken walls, no signs of a fight. The adults were alive, walking around, answering questions when asked. But they moved wrong. Their eyes tracked too slow. Their voices came out flat, like someone had scooped the person out and left the body running on backup power. Dr. Taeho Shin figured out why. He was a xenobiologist, a civilian consultant the Navy brought along for first contact situations and things that didn't fit neatly into a military report. A gentle man, mid-40s, soft-spoken, the kind of person who apologized to lab samples before running tests. He examined the colonists with careful hands and a growing silence that Hana had learned to read as dread. Neurochemical suppression, he said, not looking up from his scanner. Rathani origin. It targets the amygdala and prefrontal cortex. Fear response, aggression, executive function, all dampened to near zero. These people watched their children get taken. Their brains would not let them resist, would not let them scream. They just stood there. Hana wrote it down. How long ago, she asked. Based on the metabolic decay of the agent, 11 days. 11 days. The lunch had been sitting on those tables for 11 days. The shoes had been by the door for 11 days. 34 children had been gone for 11 days, and the galaxy had not noticed because Varath 4 was a small colony on a quiet planet, and small colonies on quiet planets did not make the news. The report went up the chain fast, past the Jindo's captain, past Sector Command, past the Joint Operations Desk at Fleet Central. It landed on the desk of Admiral Do-Hyun Kang aboard the UEN Hala, flagship of the 4th Expeditionary Fleet, at 0347 station time. Kang was not a loud man. He did not slam tables or raise his voice in briefings. He was 56 years old and had commanded ships for 23 of those years. And in all that time, he had never once bluffed, never once made a threat he did not intend to execute, and never once been wrong about whether a situation required talking or action. He carried a worn photo of his granddaughter folded into his officer's manual. She was 5. She liked butterflies. He read the report once. He set it down. He removed his glasses. He cleaned them on his sleeve. He put them back on. He read the report again. Then he called his communications officer. Open a priority channel to Earth Command. Encryption level black. Yes, Admiral. Subject line? Confirm Article 7C applicability. I need the answer in 1 hour. He paused. I already know what it is. Article 7C, the Cradle Doctrine. It sat buried deep in the treaty that had brought humanity into the Galactic Accord 40 years ago. Most species had glanced at it during ratification and assumed it was symbolic, a piece of emotional theater from a young species still learning how the galaxy worked. The clause was simple. It stated that any deliberate act of harm against human children by a foreign species constituted an act of existential war, not against a fleet, not against a government, against the offending species in totality. No exceptions. No reparations clause. No negotiated settlement provision. Most galactic diplomats had laughed about it over drinks at treaty conferences. Humans were sentimental about their offspring. Everyone knew that. It was considered a cultural quirk, like the Morvathi and their mineral hoarding, or the Telleri and their obsession with atmospheric purity. Cute, harmless, a little excessive. No species had ever triggered the clause. Earth Command's response came in 43 minutes, 17 minutes ahead of Kang's deadline. The message was 2 words: confirmed, active. Kang folded the message into his manual, next to his granddaughter's photo. Across 11 star systems, in the same hour, human ambassadors excused themselves from Rathani diplomatic functions. They were polite about it. They thanked their hosts. They collected their things. Some shook hands on the way out. None of them explained why they were leaving. None of them said goodbye. On the Rathani trade station above Korat 6, a diplomatic aide named Adjutant Penn noticed the human delegation's empty seats at a commerce summit. He flagged it to the Overmind, the networked governing consciousness of the Rathani Combine, as a minor anomaly. Probably a scheduling conflict. Probably nothing. The Overmind logged it and ran a low-priority query across its diplomatic monitoring systems. 11 simultaneous departures, all human, all within the same 60-minute window. The Overmind noted the statistical improbability and flagged it for review. It did not flag it as urgent. That was the Rathani's first mistake. Not the facility, not the children. Those were crimes. This was a mistake, the quiet, fatal kind. The kind where you see the flood warning and check whether it will affect your commute. Somewhere on a medical transport, 3 systems away, a gentle man who apologized to lab samples sat alone in a cargo bay and stared at his hands. They had not stopped shaking since he filed his report. He did not try to make them stop. He let them shake. It seemed like the least his body could do. And on a table in an empty school on a quiet planet, 34 plates of food continued to grow cold in a room that still smelled like crayons and soup, and the ordinary Tuesday those children never got to finish. They found the facility on the 9th day of searching. It was buried under the northern ridgeline of Varath 4, dug into basalt, and shielded with enough signal-dampening material to hide it from orbital scans. The Rathani had built it to be invisible. They had not built it to be unfindable. That distinction cost them everything. Sergeant Mireille Park read the intelligence briefing on the dropship down. She read it once, folded the tablet, and set it on the bench beside her. She did not discuss it with her squad. She did not need to. They had read the same briefing. The dropship carried 12 Marines in full combat gear, and not one of them spoke during the descent. The silence was not discipline. It was something older than that. Mireille was 32, built solid, patient, practical, the kind of squad leader who called her Marines by their first names and made sure they ate before she did. She had a reputation for calm under fire that other sergeants envied and psychologists studied. Nothing rattled her. Her squad trusted her with the blind faith of younger siblings. She had never wanted to kill anyone before today. The breach was clean. 2 entry points, synchronized detonation, no resistance from inside. The facility had a skeleton crew, 4 Rathani technicians and 1 senior researcher. They were not military. They did not fight. They stood in their white workspaces, with their long, pale hands raised, and their flat black eyes full of something that was not fear. It was closer to confusion, as if they could not understand why armed humans had just blown a hole in the wall of a perfectly legitimate research station. Mireille left a fire team on the technicians and pushed deeper. The children were in the central chamber, 28 of them, alive. They were in pods, transparent, climate-controlled, wired. Each child lay on a narrow platform with Rithani neural probes attached to their temples and the base of their skulls. Monitors displayed brainwave patterns and scripts Mireille could not read. The pods hummed. The room smelled like antiseptic, and something underneath it that she did not want to name. Some children were unconscious. Some were in a twilight state, eyes half opened, fingers twitching. Some were awake. A boy looked at her. 9 years old, thin, eyes too wide and too still. He looked at her the way an animal looks at a sound it has heard too many times, checking whether this one was real or just another part of the loop. "Are you real this time?" he said. Mireille's throat locked. She reached up and pulled off her helmet so he could see her face, her hair, her human, ordinary, imperfect face. She nodded. She kept nodding because her voice was not available, and her head was all she had. The boy's name was Sunwoo Bei. He liked drawing spaceships. He had been in that pod for 11 days. She got him out. She got all of them out. One by one, her Marines disconnected the probes with hands trained for rifles and grenades, now doing the most careful work of their lives. Dr. Taeho Shin arrived with the medical team 20 minutes later and took over extraction. He moved through the chamber with the quiet efficiency of a man who had decided that falling apart was something he could do later. He did not do it later either. He just stopped talking. For 3 days after the facility, Taeho Shin did not say a single word to anyone. He filed reports, he annotated scans, he oversaw the children's medical treatment. He did all of this in writing. 6 children had not survived the procedures. Their pods were empty. The Rethany had removed them with the same tidy efficiency they brought to everything. Hana Yoon handled the interrogation of the senior researcher. Her name was biologist Tav. She was cooperative, eager even. She sat across from Hana in a bare room on the Jindo, and explained her work with the pride of someone presenting at a conference. Her project had been studying human developmental neurology, specifically the bonding mechanism. The thing that made human parents so disproportionately protective of their young. The Rethany had observed it for decades and found it fascinating, irrational, potentially exploitable if the trigger could be isolated. The children had been test subjects. Tav used the word specimens. She used it more than once. We selected pre-reproductive juveniles specifically to minimize economic impact on your colony, Tav explained. Her translator rendered the words in clean, clinical English. Younger subjects provided cleaner neurological baselines. The developmental bonding response is strongest in subjects aged 6 to 10. We were very precise in our selection criteria. Hana's face did not move. Not a muscle. Not a twitch. "You are saying," Hana said, "that you chose the youngest children on purpose." "Of course, the data quality was significantly better." "And the 6 who died during your procedures?" Tav tilted her head. The gesture meant something different in Rithani body language. Acknowledgement of a minor inefficiency. Calibration errors in the early phases. We adjusted the probe intensity after the 3rd loss. The survival rate improved markedly in subsequent trials. Hana set her pen down. She folded her hands. Her voice, already cool, dropped half a register into a place her colleagues knew meant the recording was about to become evidence. "Please repeat that last part for the record." Tav did. She did not understand why it mattered. The full report, the facility layout, the research notes, the children's medical evaluations, and the complete transcript of biologist Tav's interrogation reached Admiral Kang aboard the Hala at 2200 hours. He read it in his quarters, alone. The ship's automated log noted that he did not request food or drink for 14 hours. No visitors, no calls. When he emerged, he was carrying a single page, handwritten. Not a battle plan, not an order of operations, not a tactical directive. A letter, addressed to the Rithani Overmind, written in human standard on one side and Rithani transcript on the other. It contained no threats. It contained no ultimatums. It contained no list of demands or conditions or terms. It simply described what had been found in the facility, in what condition, and what had been done to 34 children over 11 days by Rathani researchers operating under Rathani authority. It ended with one sentence. You are now combatants under the Cradle Doctrine, and we do not negotiate its terms. Kang handed the letter to his communications officer and returned to his quarters. The photo of his granddaughter was on his desk. She was 5. She liked butterflies. She was 3 star systems away and perfectly safe, and none of that changed the weight in his chest by even a fraction. He sat with it. The galaxy found out on a Tuesday. Not because Earth made an announcement. Humans were not dramatic about it. The information simply moved through the channels that information moves through. Diplomatic backrooms, intelligence networks, trade guild gossip lines. And by the end of that Tuesday, every species in the Galactic Accord understood 2 things. First, that the Rathani had taken 34 human children from a colony world and used them as laboratory specimens. Second, that humanity had activated Article 7C of the Accord Treaty. The first fact was disturbing. The second fact was terrifying. Not because of what the clause said. Every ambassador had a copy. They had all read it at some point, usually with a glass of something strong, and a chuckle about human sentimentality. The clause was terrifying now, because every species in the Accord was running the same calculation in the same moment. The humans had written that clause 40 years ago. They had never once attempted to soften it in 4 decades of diplomacy. And they had just activated it with the calm efficiency of a man flipping a switch he had always known was there. The Rathani Overmind received Kang's letter and processed it in 0.003 seconds. It was a networked consciousness. Millions of Rathani ruling caste minds linked into a single distributed intelligence. It did not feel emotions the way individual beings did. It computed. It optimized. It ran cost-benefit models with a processing power that made human supercomputers look like pocket calculators. It ran the model on the Cradle Doctrine 17 times. Every model that included human emotional variables returned the same output: non-survivable engagement. There were none. It checked for corrupted data inputs. There were none. The math was correct. Humans would mobilize a force disproportionate to the strategic value of 34 juvenile members of their species, absorb losses that no rational actor would accept, and continue until the objective was achieved or they were physically incapable of continuing. The Overmind could not find the error because there was no error. It was simply encountering, for the first time in its existence, a variable it could not price. Human children were not military assets. They were not economic producers. They were not strategically significant by any metric the Overmind used. And yet the entire species was about to go to war over them. Not proportional war, not limited engagement, but the full and total kind that ended civilizations. It did not compute. So the Overmind did what networked intelligences do when the model breaks. It sent a diplomat. Adjutant Penn arrived at Korath Station, expecting to meet Admiral Kang. The station was neutral ground, a trade hub maintained by the Tellerai, one of the Accord's oldest and most cautious members. Penn had prepared extensively. He carried authorization to offer territorial concessions, technology transfers, research data, mineral rights, and a formal apology crafted in 17 diplomatic registers. He was met by Lieutenant Hana Yoon, alone. She sat at a metal table in a bare room with a data tablet and a glass of water. No aides, no guards, no flag, no insignia beyond the standard UEN patch on her shoulder. Penn read this as a negotiating tactic, a show of informality to create false comfort. He had trained for this. It was not a tactic. Admiral Kang simply did not attend negotiations he had no intention of conducting. Adjutant Penn, Hana said. Please sit. He sat. He began his presentation. The Rathani Combine deeply regretted the unauthorized actions of a rogue research team on Verath 4. The individuals responsible would be surrendered to human custody. The Combine was prepared to offer significant territorial concessions in the Verath sector as a gesture of good faith. Additionally, the Combine would transfer. Noted, Hana said. She made a mark on her tablet. Next. Penn paused. He had not finished. He adjusted and continued. Technology transfers. Full schematics for Rathani medical scanning systems. Access to the Combine's deep space navigation database. Exclusive. Noted. Next. Penn offered mineral rights. Hana noted them. He offered a public apology broadcast across Accord channels. Noted. He offered the permanent closure of all Rathani research programs involving non-Rathani biological subjects. Noted. He ran out of offers. She looked at him, the way a doctor looks at a scan that confirms what they already suspected. The Cradle Doctrine does not contain a reparations clause, she said. It has an outcome. One outcome. Which is the cessation of your species' capacity to threaten human children again. The method is at our discretion. Penn was quiet for 4 seconds. In Rathani communication, 4 seconds of silence was a long time. It meant the processor was overloaded. What do the humans want? He asked. I am not authorized to want anything, Adjutant. I am here to inform you of the timeline. 3 other Accord species tried. The Telleri, the Morvathi, and the Osek each sent private delegations to Earth's Accord embassy, requesting that humanity stand down or at least accept a mediated resolution. They were sympathetic. They were reasonable. They were afraid. Ambassador Unji Cho met each delegation personally. She was a small woman with short gray hair and the kind of patience that comes from having argued trade policy for 30 years. She listened carefully to every proposal. She thanked each delegation for their concern and their friendship. She told them Earth valued the Accord and its partnerships deeply. She changed nothing. Ambassador, the Telleri envoy said, choosing his words like a man stepping across broken glass. The proportionality of your response is, forgive me, difficult for us to understand. Unji looked at him. 34 children were taken from a school. 6 of them died in a laboratory. The rest were found with machines in their heads. What proportion would you suggest? The envoy did not have an answer for that. Meanwhile, Admiral Kang's fleet departed Verath 4. It did not head toward Rathani space. It headed toward Earth. This confused the Rathani intelligence analysts monitoring its trajectory. They expected a strike force moving fast toward Combine territory, a hot, angry thrust of warships. Instead, they watched the 4th Fleet join the 1st, the 7th, the 12th, the 3rd, the 9th, and the 15th at the Sol assembly point. 1,700 warships, the largest human mobilization since first contact. They were not rushing, they were gathering. This was worse. A hot, angry fleet could burn itself out. A fleet that took the time to assemble, to organize, to supply, to plan, was not angry. It was decided. Adjutant Penn, back on Korath Station, watched the fleet reports come in and sent one final message to Lieutenant Yoon through the diplomatic relay. It was short, almost personal for a Rathani. Is there truly nothing we can offer? The response came in 11 minutes, 4 words. You took our children. Penn sat in his quarters and read those 4 words several times. He had spent his career translating between species, finding the flexible space in rigid positions, locating the price that made conflict more expensive than compromise. Every species had a price. Every species had a thing they would accept in exchange for a thing they wanted. That was the foundation of galactic civilization. He read the 4 words again. For the first time in his professional life, Adjutant Penn considered the possibility that he was dealing with a species that did not have a price. Not for this. The concept sat in his mind like a stone in water, heavy, still, and sinking. He filed no report. There was nothing to report. The Overmind would run its models again and get the same answer. And it would keep looking for an error it would never find, because the error was not in the math. The error was in believing everything had math. The fleet crossed into Rethani space on a Thursday morning, Earth Standard Time, and the galaxy held its breath. Every Acorn species had monitoring posts along the border. Telerized sensor arrays, Morvathi deep space relays, OSEC signal intercepts. They all watched. They had been watching since the fleet assembled at Sol, and they kept watching now, because whatever happened next was going to rewrite the rules that every species in the galaxy lived by, and no one wanted to learn about it secondhand. What they expected was rage, a furious, burning charge across Rethani space, human warships tearing through defense lines, orbital bombardments turning cities to glass, the kind of scorched earth campaign that young, emotional species were supposed to wage when they were hurt. What they got was something else entirely. Admiral Do-Hyun Kang's fleet entered Rethani space in formation, tight, organized, moving at cruise speed, not combat speed. They were not rushing. They advanced the way a surgeon walks into an operating room, calm, prepared, and absolutely certain about what was going to happen next. Phase 1 began 6 hours after the border crossing. Human cyber warfare units, specialists who had spent their careers studying Rethani network architecture, the way biologists study nervous systems, launched a synchronized attack on the Overmind's interstellar communication links. Not the local networks, not the civilian channels, the deep link connections that held the Overmind together across star systems, the threads that made 1,000,000 minds into one mind. They cut them, not all at once. That would have been mercy. They cut them sector by sector, system by system, like someone pulling threads from a web and watching the spider try to hold on. The Overmind felt it as a sensation it had no name for, a progressive narrowing, a shrinking of self, as pieces of its consciousness went dark, one by one. Individual Rethani nodes, cut off from the network, experienced isolation for the first time in their species' recorded history. They had a networked word for connection that was so fundamental to their language, it appeared in every sentence, the way oxygen appears in every breath. They did not have a word for its absence. Humans did. Humans called it loneliness. Phase 2 followed within the day. Rethani military installations were targeted with precision that made the Accord observers revise their estimates of human weapons technology upward by 2 generations. Orbital defense platforms, shipyards, weapons research centers, fleet staging areas, each one was identified, engaged, and destroyed, with zero negotiation and zero communication. No demands for surrender before firing. The Rethani had built their military to fight rational actors, species that would calculate the cost of each engagement and stop when the math stopped making sense. Their defenses were optimized for that kind of war. They were not optimized for a species that did not stop. But something else happened during Phase 2 that the Accord observers noted and would discuss in diplomatic academies for centuries afterward. The fleet passed over civilian populations without firing. Rethani cities, habitation complexes, agricultural stations, schools. The human warships moved above them, darkened the sky with their hulls, and kept going. Rethani civilians looked up and saw the belly of a fleet that could turn their world to ash, and the fleet looked back and did nothing. The message was not spoken. It did not need to be. We know the difference between a soldier and a child. That is the point. Phase 3 targeted the research facilities. Every Rethani research installation in Combine territory. Not just the biological ones. All of them. Dr. Taeho Shin provided the targeting data from the intelligence files recovered on Vareth 4. He worked around the clock, cross-referencing Rithani Research Network addresses with known facility locations, flagging each one for the fleet's targeting systems. He did not sleep during this phase. When a medical officer suggested rest, Tejo looked at her with eyes that had not been quite right since the facility, and said nothing. She did not suggest it again. Sergeant Mireille Park led ground operations on 3 Rithani worlds. Her Marines secured military installations, processed prisoners, disabled defense systems. It was clean, efficient work. Mireille ran her squad the way she always did. Firm, fair, focused. She made sure captured Rithani soldiers were fed and given medical attention. She followed the rules of engagement with the rigid precision of someone who understood that the rules were not a limitation. They were the difference between justice and the other thing. On the second world, a captured Rithani officer asked her a question through a translator. "Why are you doing this?" Mireille had been checking ammunition counts. She stopped. She looked at the Rithani, tall, pale, flat black eyes that still carried the confusion she had seen on every Rithani face since the campaign began. They genuinely did not understand. She thought about it. She gave the question more time than it probably deserved, because the answer mattered and she wanted to get it right. "You people took apart children to find out why we love them," she said. She walked away. The Rithani officer watched her go and said nothing, because for the first time in his life, he had no follow-up question. He just could not fit it anywhere inside his understanding of how the universe worked. The campaign lasted 19 days. On the 14th day, the Overmind, fragmented, reduced, running on a fraction of its former processing capacity, attempted a final move. It assembled what remained of its diplomatic protocols and transmitted an offer directly to Admiral Kang's flagship. The offer was simple. The Rithani would surrender biologist Tav and every researcher involved in the Vareth 4 project. They would be handed over to human custody, judged under human law, sentenced by human courts. Full accountability, complete submission on the individuals responsible. In exchange, the campaign would stop. The Rithani Combine would survive as a political entity. Kang received the offer in his quarters. He read it slowly. He set it down. He picked it up and read it again. For the first time in the campaign, he hesitated. Not because the offer tempted him. It did not. The doctrine had no provision for partial accountability, and he had known that since the day he activated it. He hesitated because he recognized something in the offer that he had not expected to see. The Overmind was not bargaining. It was not calculating. It was, in its fragmented and desperate way, trying to do the thing that moral beings do when they realize they have done something wrong. It was trying to sacrifice something. The sacrifice was insufficient. It was the wrong shape and the wrong size, and it misunderstood what the humans were actually responding to. The problem was not that individual researchers had harmed children. The problem was that an entire civilization had built the systems, the culture, the intellectual framework that made that facility possible, that could approve it, fund it, staff it, and feel no wrongness until the cost arrived. The system was the failure, not the people in it. His refusal was 3 sentences long, polite, clear, final. On the medical ship above Vareth 4, far from the campaign and its clean geometry of destruction, a boy named Sunwoo Bei sat in a recovery ward and drew pictures. He had started drawing again 4 days after extraction. The doctors considered it a good sign. The child psychology team was less certain. His new pictures were not spaceships. They were walls. Tall walls, thick walls. Walls around small figures that might have been people and might have been something else. The walls had no doors. Dr. Tejo Shin saw the drawings during a visit. He stood in the doorway of Sunwoo's room and looked at them for a long time. He did not say anything to the medical staff. He sat down next to Sunwoo, and picked up a crayon and drew walls too. They sat together and drew walls in silence, while 19 light-years away, the fleet continued its work. And neither of them talked about why the walls had no doors, because some things do not need to be said to be understood, and some things cannot be said at all. Nobody used the word victory. That was the thing the Accord historians would note later, when they wrote about it, when they tried to make sense of what humanity had done, and how humanity had carried itself afterward. No parades, no celebrations, no speeches about triumph or justice served. The fleet came home, and the crews disembarked and went to their families and did not talk about it much. And the galaxy watched this silence and understood something about humans that all the treaties and trade agreements and cultural exchange programs had never managed to teach them. The Rathani Combine ceased to exist as a political entity on the 23rd day. Not exterminated. That word was important, and Ambassador Unji Cho made sure every species in the Accord understood it. The Rathani were not dead, their worlds were intact, their civilian populations were alive, fed, sheltered. What was gone was the architecture, the overmind, permanently severed into isolated fragments that could never be reconnected. The military, dismantled. The government, dissolved. The research networks, erased. The Rathani would survive as individuals, as communities, as scattered enclaves, living under Accord supervision, on worlds that used to be theirs. They would not survive as a power. That was the doctrine's design. Not genocide, defanging. Yunji Cho addressed the full Galactic Accord Assembly 3 days after the campaign's end. The chamber was a vast amphitheater carved into an asteroid, neutral ground, built a century ago to hold the voices of 100 species. It had never been this quiet. Yunji was a small woman. Gray hair, plain suit, no decorations. She walked to the speaking platform with the unhurried pace of someone who had spent 30 years in rooms like this and had long ago stopped being impressed by them. She carried a single sheet of paper. She did not talk about the campaign. She did not discuss strategy, or justify the doctrine, or explain humanity's position. She read names. Yuna Choi, age 7. The chamber was silent. Jinho Ma, age 11. Soen Ryu, age 8. Hajun No, age 6. She read each name the way you read something that matters, slowly, clearly, with a kind of attention that turns words into people. Daeun Ko, age 9. Isil Kwan, age 12. 6 names, 6 children who went to school on an ordinary Tuesday and did not come home. She read all 6, and when she was done, she folded the paper, put it in her pocket, and sat down. She did not say anything else. There was nothing else. The names were the argument. Adjutant Penn watched the address from a Telerai refugee processing center. He had requested asylum the day the Overmind fell, and the Telerai had granted it, quietly, without fanfare, because they understood that some things required mercy, even when mercy was complicated. His quarters were small, clean, functional. He had a desk, a cot, a terminal with limited network access. It was more than enough. He had spent his career surrounded by the constant hum of the Overmind's presence, millions of minds at the edge of his thoughts. Now there was silence. He was learning to live in it. He sat at his desk and began writing. Not a diplomatic brief, not a strategic analysis, a document that had no precedent in Rathani intellectual history. He was trying to describe a concept that his language did not have a word for. The idea that some things are not resources, not assets, not variables in an equation. Something that exists outside the framework of cost and benefit entirely. The closest translation in human language was sacred. He wrote the word in Rathani script. It looked wrong. It looked like it did not belong in his language. He kept writing anyway, because the wrongness of it was precisely the point. His people had built a civilization without that word, and the absence had led them to a facility on Vareth 4, where they had put machines in the heads of children. The word needed to exist, even if it sat ugly and foreign in the grammar, especially then. He did not know if his people would understand it. Most of them, he suspected, would not. They would read it and feel the same confusion that biologist Tav had felt in that interrogation room. The flat, blank incomprehension of a mind encountering a value system it has no hardware to process. Somewhere, some fragment of what used to be the Rethani might read his words and feel the first crack of something they had never felt before. He was writing for them, for the cracks. Admiral Do Hyun Kang retired 4 months after the campaign. His service record was long and decorated. Commendations, campaigns, the Vareth 4 operation, listed in the careful language that military records use when the truth is too heavy for plain text. A ceremony was held. Hands were shaken. Words were said. His personal effects were shipped to his home on Jeju. Among them, catalogued neatly in a standard military transport crate, was one item not in the manifest. A crayon drawing of a purple spaceship, signed Sun Woo, age 9. He had taken it from the colony school wall on Vareth 4, before the facility was found, before he knew what had happened. He had just seen it pinned up among the other drawings, and thought that a kid would probably want it back when this was over. He never returned it. He meant to, several times. He would pick it up and look at the wobbly stars and the lopsided ship, and think about the boy who drew it, and each time he would put it back down. Eventually he stopped pretending he was going to give it back, and framed it instead. It hung in his study, next to the photo of his granddaughter. She was 6 now. She still liked butterflies. Lieutenant Hana Yoon transferred to Accord Oversight, the newly expanded body tasked with monitoring treaty compliance across all member species. She was very good at her job. Her assessments were precise, thorough, and delivered without warmth. She did not smile in meetings. She did not make small talk at diplomatic functions. She sat across from representatives of a dozen species, and every single one of them knew exactly what she had seen and exactly what her species had done about it. Negotiations went smoothly. They always did. Sergeant Mireille Park returned to active duty and requested a transfer to colony protection. She was stationed on a frontier world called Danan 3. It had a small settlement, a supply depot, a medical clinic, and a school. The school had 41 students. Mireille coached their zero-gravity football league on weekends. She was absurdly competitive about it. She argued calls with volunteer referees. She drew up play diagrams on napkins at lunch. She celebrated goals like they were military victories. The kids thought she was the best coach in the sector. They were probably right. Dr. Taeho Shin returned to his university position. He published no papers about Rathani neurology. The data existed. Comprehensive, detailed, the product of research that had been extracted from the Varath 4 facility and could have advanced the field by decades. Other researchers asked about it. Journals inquired. A colleague, persistent and well-meaning, cornered him at a faculty dinner and asked directly why he was sitting on the most significant xenoneurological dataset in human history. Taeho considered the question. He had a glass of water in his hand. He looked at it for a while. "Because I know why they took the children," he said. "I do not need anyone else learning that the answer was interesting." He burned his copies the next day, all of them. The physical drives, the backup files, the annotated notes he had made during the extraction. He fed them into a department incinerator and watched them turn to nothing, and felt something loosen in his chest that had been tight for months. Sun Woo Bei turned 10. He drew every day, in fact, more than he had before Vareth 4. As if the thing that had been done to him had cracked something open, and the drawings were what leaked out. His therapist called it processing. His mother called it healing. Sun Wu called it drawing. His new pictures were ships again. That was progress. But they were different from the ships he used to draw. The wobbly purple rockets with lopsided stars. These ships were bigger, heavier. They had thick hulls and reinforced plating, and around each one, walls. Strong walls, drawn with hard crayon strokes, layer after layer until the color was dense and dark. Ships with walls around them, fortresses that could fly. Nobody asked him to explain the walls. The people around him, the doctors, his mother, the quiet xenobiologist who visited sometimes and drew alongside him without saying much, they understood that the walls were not a symptom to be solved. Sun Wu's answer to a question no 9-year-old should have to ask. How do you make something safe enough to go somewhere dangerous? You build the walls yourself. Years later, enough years that the Verath 4 incident had moved from headlines to textbooks. A young diplomat from a newly contacted species sat in the Accord Treaty Archive and read Article 7C for the first time. She was bright, ambitious, and educated in the tradition of her people, who believed that all conflicts were ultimately resolvable through sufficient information exchange. She found the clause disproportionate, extreme. She might have used the word barbaric if she were less diplomatic. She turned to her mentor, a Tellerai senior advisor who had been navigating galactic politics since before she was born. Has this clause ever been challenged? She asked. Surely the Accord could argue that it violates proportionality standards. The Tellerai was quiet for a long time. His eyes, large, dark, adapted for the dim light of his homeworld, watched her with the patience of a species that had learned long ago to be very careful about which questions they answered, and how. There was a species that tested it once, he said. The young diplomat waited. She expected context, elaboration, a case study. There was none. She looked at her mentor. He looked back. The silence between them held the weight of 19 days and 6 names, and a fleet that passed over cities without firing, and a boy who drew walls around everything he loved. She moved on to Article 8.